Sometimes silence speaks louder than anger, and sometimes revenge doesn't need to be loud to echo forever. My name is Marjorie Elaine Bennett, and I'm 74 years old. I've raised 3 children, lost 1 good man to cancer, buried both of my parents, and lived long enough to see the world change more than once. I've seen rotary phones become relics, handwritten letters turn into emojis, and family dinners traded for FaceTime. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for the moment when your own child decides you've reached your expiration date. It started, oddly enough, with a fruit basket. Now, I'm not ungrateful. I know kindness doesn't always come wrapped in silk or gold. But when your only son sends you a fruit basket for your birthday with a printed note, "Stay safe. Stay home. Love, Eric and Kelsey," it tells you more than it intends. I sat at the kitchen table that morning with the basket in front of me, staring at a collection of perfectly polished apples and pre-wrapped cheese wedges. Not a phone call, not a visit, not even a slice of cake. 74. That's what I turned. Not 104, not bedridden, not fading into the background. I still do my own gardening. I walk a mile every morning. And yet, they treat me like a fragile heirloom, best left on a high shelf. Eric had promised he'd come by. Just for tea, he said. Just an hour. But the night before, I got a text. "Hey Mom, sorry, we're swamped. Kelsey's got work stuff and I need to prep for this cruise. Let's catch up after we're back. Love you." Cruise? That was the first I'd heard of it. Curious, I tapped on the photo attachment. It was a screenshot of a booking confirmation, a luxury anniversary cruise on the Azure Princess, leaving in 2 weeks. A 10-day trip through the Caribbean, complete with private excursions, 5-star dining, and champagne under the stars. No mention of it before now, no invitation, not even a "would you like to come?" From the boy I once carried in my arms through 3 consecutive winters of bronchitis. The boy I once worked 2 jobs to help through college when his financial aid fell through. That boy had apparently decided that his mother, his own mother, was too old to keep up. I wouldn't have known more if it weren't for a call I accidentally overheard. I had stepped outside to water the roses and left my phone charging on the side table. When I came back in, I could hear Eric's voice, muffled but clear. He hadn't hung up properly. I froze. "She's too old to travel anyway," he said. "She'd just slow everything down. Honestly, I don't want to be babysitting my mom on our anniversary." There was laughter, Kelsey's laugh, unmistakably sharp. "Let's just enjoy this one without family drama," she said. "We deserve something elegant." Elegant. Apparently, I was the opposite of that. I stood there for a long time, the sound of that word, babysitting, echoing in my ears. I wasn't angry at first. I wasn't even sad. I just felt erased. There was a time when Eric used to call me his hero. When he won his first high school debate, he ran into my arms and whispered, "We did it, Mom." I still have that medal in a box upstairs. I keep it beside a yellowed drawing he made in 2nd grade. 2 stick figures labeled Eric and Mom, holding hands under a crooked sun. I thought about those small things. And then I thought about the woman my son married, Kelsey. Polished, perfect, always too busy. The kind of woman who sends a text instead of calling, who calls her own children my little investments, who once told me during Thanksgiving that aging is a mindset, but yours seems stuck. That night, I didn't cry. I sat in my armchair with the lights low and the cruise confirmation still open on my phone. 10 days, leaving from Miami, Azure Princess, balcony suite, special dinners, no seniors. I remember blinking at that line. No kids, no seniors. Like it was some kind of club. And I realized they were right. I didn't belong on their cruise. But maybe they didn't belong on mine either. That was the moment something shifted. Something quiet, cold, determined. I didn't want to go to the same dinners or sit at the same shows. I didn't want to prove anything. I didn't want to scream, "See, I can still live." I just wanted to be there. to remind them in the most elegant way possible that I still existed. So I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out an envelope, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside, it was a travel voucher, a luxury suite reservation from my late husband's estate. He had booked it for our 50th anniversary, but cancer got there first. I never used it. Couldn't bear to. Until now. I opened my laptop, found the Azure Princess website, plugged in the dates. Only one room available at that level, owner's suite. It cost more than I'd ever spent on myself in one sitting. I clicked book now. Then I smiled. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I brewed my coffee just how I liked it, black with a pinch of cinnamon, and sat by the window in my robe, watching the world wake up. The reservation confirmation had come in just after midnight. Owner's suite, priority boarding, full-service concierge. I didn't sleep much after that, not because of nerves. No, I was just excited, like a child the night before school starts. Except I wasn't going back to school. I was going somewhere I had never been allowed before. I kept my plans to myself, not out of spite, out of preservation. I'd learned over time that when people see you as old, they think your decisions are fair game for criticism. Are you sure you can handle the heat, Marjorie? Or isn't that too far to travel at your age, always laced with fake concern but dripping with condescension? I wasn't. About to let them poke holes in something I'd waited a lifetime to do. I took out a notepad and began writing a packing list. Comfortable shoes, linen slacks, the silk scarf I bought years ago and never wore, and a sun hat, wide-brimmed, bold, and unapologetic. I wanted to feel like myself again, not someone's afterthought. But it was hard not to think back. Hard not to compare this quiet kitchen to the ones that once held cake, balloons, children running through hallways, and little handprints on windows. My house used to be full of noise, of life, and it used to center around me. Until one day, without warning, I became the satellite, just floating on the edge of everyone else's orbit. I remember when Eric was 12, and we got stuck in a snowstorm coming home from the grocery store. I carried the groceries and held his hand through 3 blocks of thick snow while he shivered. When we finally got inside, I wrapped him in blankets, fed him hot soup, and made him laugh until the cold left his bones. When he got into college, he cried into my shoulder because he was scared to leave home. "You'll be okay, baby," I told him, "and so will I." Only one of us was telling the truth. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being the person he ran to and became the person he ran from. There were signs, of course. Missed calls, canceled plans, holidays where I was told, "We're keeping it small this year, just the kids," which meant me excluded. One Thanksgiving, they forgot to pick me up altogether, said they got caught up in errands. I ate a microwave turkey dinner alone, while a video of the family toast popped up in the group chat, everyone laughing, Kelsey wearing pearls, Eric holding a wine glass. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to sound bitter, or lonely, or, God forbid, needy. So I smiled through their excuses. Let them believe I didn't mind. Let them rewrite me into the background of their lives. But I was never a background character in my own story. Not when I worked overtime to buy Eric his first car. Not when I stayed up nights sewing costumes for his school plays. Not when I helped Kelsey plan their wedding, even when she politely told me she wanted the ceremony to be modern and minimal, which really meant, don't bring any family traditions from your side. I'd kept my silence for years, until now. 2 days after I booked the cruise, Kelsey sent out a group email. Family update. Photos of the kids in matching vacation outfits. Caption, "Getting ready for the Azure Princess. 10 days of bliss and no stress. Eric deserves a break from all the chaos." There it was again, a casual reminder that I didn't belong, that my presence would count as chaos. I almost replied. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed out, "Sounds lovely. I'll see you on board." But then I hit delete. Why tell them? Why ruin the surprise? They thought they knew where I belonged, thought they could decide when my life was small enough, slow enough, safe enough. But I still had stories left in me. I still had oceans to see, and I still had one trick up my sleeve, one my late husband, God rest his soul, would have applauded. The travel voucher he left me was no ordinary gift. It was tied to a long-forgotten investment in the cruise line itself. He'd bought it before he passed, said one day I'd need a reminder that I was still living. And because of it, I wasn't just a passenger. I was listed as a legacy owner, which meant the owner's suite was mine without question, even in peak season. Funny how people spend their lives assuming you're done. Washed up. A ghost trailing behind. But ghosts know how to haunt the right places. And I planned to make my entrance quietly, but permanently. Let them drink champagne under the stars. I'd already chosen my gown for the gala night. A few days after I booked the cruise, I invited my oldest friend, Dorothy, over for tea. She's the kind of friend who never asks too many questions, but always seems to know when something's shifting under your skin. We've been friends since we were both teachers, back when I wore pencil skirts and she smoked menthols behind the teacher's lounge. We sat in the garden with our mugs and a plate of lemon cookies between us. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, and the breeze was gentle. Dorothy wore her usual hat, more for drama than sun protection, and looked at me with that sly expression she gets when she knows there's a secret I'm not sharing. "Well?" she asked, leaning back in the wicker chair. "You've got that quiet war face on. What's going on, Margie?" I took a sip of tea before answering. "Eric and Kelsey are going on a cruise next week. 10 days. Azure Princess." She frowned. "And they invited you?" I shook my head. "Ah," she said softly. "So that's what this is." I nodded. "They think I'm too old to enjoy it. Too much trouble. I overheard them say it." Dorothy blinked, then slowly set her mug down. "I hope you didn't break anything." "I didn't," I said. "But I did book the owner's suite." Dorothy stared at me. Then her mouth curved into a slow grin that turned into a belly laugh. "You brilliant woman." I smiled. I figured I'd remind them I'm not dead yet. "Not just alive," she said, reaching for a cookie. "You're plotting like royalty." It felt good to talk to someone who didn't pity me, who didn't lower her voice when talking about people our age. Dorothy always said age is just a lens. Some people squint through it and see weakness, but the smart ones? They see strength sharpened by time. I told her everything. The voucher from Richard, the owner's suite, the legacy privileges, the early boarding, the private deck. Dorothy sat back, impressed. "Do they have any idea?" "Not a clue," I said. "They think I'll be here trimming roses and watching cable news." She chuckled. "You'll be drinking champagne while they're busy trying to avoid buffet lines." That image stuck with me, not because I needed champagne, but because it represented something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not over them, but over my own story. I wasn't out to ruin their trip. I wasn't going to cause a scene or demand attention. I didn't want a confrontation. What I wanted was for them to see me, not the image they kept in their minds of a retired widow shuffling through life, but me. The woman who raised a family, ran a classroom, saved money in envelopes, buried a husband, kept going, quietly, steadily. And if it took booking the most exclusive room on that ship to do it, so be it. The next few days I prepared in secret. I called the cruise concierge and confirmed every detail. They addressed me as Mrs. Bennett, with a tone that felt both respectful and oddly deferential, something I hadn't heard in years. The concierge asked if I wanted assistance packing. I politely declined. I wanted to do it myself, to feel each item in my hands, to choose what part of me I was taking along. I selected 3 elegant dresses, one floral, one deep green with lace sleeves, and one navy gown that Richard once called dangerous, as in, if you wear that to dinner, I'm canceling the check. I added a pair of gold heels I hadn't worn since my granddaughter's baptism, and a soft white shawl that still carried the faintest trace of lavender. I packed modestly but carefully. At night, I sat on the porch with my tea, watching the sky fade into dusk, feeling something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. It wasn't about being rebellious. I wasn't trying to be youthful or outrageous. I wasn't booking this trip out of bitterness or to prove anything. It was simpler than that. I just wanted to live on my own terms, one more time, before the world tried to tuck me away like a folded sweater. The day before the cruise, Eric texted, "Hey Mom, don't forget to check the mail. We had something delivered. Also, could you water our plants next week while we're away? Back porch keys still in the usual place." He didn't ask where I'd be, didn't wonder if I had plans, just assumed, like always, that I'd be available, waiting, grateful to be useful. I didn't reply. I just turned my phone face down, let them board that ship believing I was at home, pruning roses in my backyard, let them feel the freedom of escape, the thrill of luxury. They had no idea who'd be watching from above their suite, or that the woman they dismissed would soon walk past them like a ghost wrapped in silk and sunlight. Tomorrow, I'd carry my small suitcase into a world they thought didn't belong to me anymore. But I was taking it back, quietly, elegantly, one step at a time. I woke early on the morning of the cruise, the kind of early that doesn't come from an alarm clock, but from anticipation that hums in your chest before the sun even breaks the sky. The air felt crisp, even though it was July. My suitcase sat by the front door, packed with everything I needed, and more importantly, everything I didn't tell them I had. My documents, my confirmation email, and Richard's legacy voucher were folded neatly into a leather folder he once used when he traveled for conferences. I ran my fingers over the worn corners. It felt like he was coming with me. I looked around my little home, the one I've lived in for over 40 years. The lace curtains in the kitchen, the creaky hall cabinet, the framed photos on the mantel, all of it familiar, all of it still mine. But something about today made it feel like I was stepping out of it for the first time in years. Not just going on a trip. No, this felt like emergence. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, not even my daughter, not even the neighbor who always asks too many questions. I had a house sitter coming later that day, a young college girl who didn't know or care about my family. She only needed the keys and instructions on the garden. By 9 a.m., I was seated in the back of a black car the cruise concierge had arranged. The driver, Daniel, was polite, soft-spoken, and called me ma'am, like I was royalty. I didn't correct him. The drive to the port was smooth. I watched the trees pass by through the window like pages turning in a book I'd read too many times. But this time, the ending was changing. When we reached the harbor, the Azure Princess towered above everything like a floating castle. White and sleek, with gold trim along the top decks, it gleamed in the sun as if it had been waiting just for me. I'd seen photos of it before, promotional images mostly, but nothing prepared me for the reality of it. There was something surreal about knowing that my son and daughter-in-law were boarding the same ship at the same time, with no idea I'd be just floors above them. Daniel carried my suitcase to the private VIP entrance. No lines, no noise. Just calm efficiency and a warm smile from a sharply dressed woman with a name tag that read, Katrina, Guest Relations Executive. "Mrs. Bennett?" she asked, stepping forward with an iPad in her hands. "Yes," I said, smoothing my blouse. "That's me." She smiled wider. "Welcome aboard. Everything is ready. If you'll follow me, I'll take you directly to your suite." It was the first time in years someone had looked at me like I was important, not for who I used to be, not as someone's mother or widow, but as a person worth noticing. The walk through the VIP hallways felt like a dream. Glass walls, polished marble floors, attendants who greeted me by name. When the elevator doors opened onto the topmost deck, a warm breeze hit my face, and then I saw it. Suite 1701, the owner's suite. 2 glass doors opened to a private hallway and then into a living room. that felt more like a penthouse than a ship cabin. Rich wooden furniture, plush cream couches, gold-framed paintings, and windows that looked out over the sea like a throne view. There was even a welcome card on the table. To our esteemed guest, Mrs. Bennett, we are honored to host you. May your voyage be filled with beauty and peace. Captain R. Montoya. I ran my hand along the smooth fabric of the armchair. This wasn't a revenge fantasy. It wasn't a stunt. It was a declaration. I wasn't here to punish anyone. I was here because I belonged. While the concierge gave me a tour of the suite and explained the services available, private dining, on-call steward, spa access, early reservations, I heard the familiar hum of boarding announcements through the intercom. Eric and Kelsey would be arriving now, likely arguing over their luggage, probably snapping selfies at the harbor terminal. I imagined them walking through the bustling main entrance, full of people and long lines. Meanwhile, I was already on the deck above, sipping cucumber water handed to me on a silver tray. I changed into a light linen blouse, tucked a silk scarf gently around my neck, and stepped out onto my private balcony. From where I stood, I could see people boarding below, tiny figures moving through security checks, dragging roller bags and fussing with boarding passes. I leaned on the railing and breathed in the scent of the sea. I didn't see them right away. But then, there she was. Kelsey, her hair perfectly curled, white sundress flowing, sunglasses perched high on her nose. She was filming something on her phone, likely an Instagram story, panning the ship behind her. I didn't move. Then Eric appeared beside her, holding 2 coffees and looking slightly sunburnt already. He handed her one and smiled. I watched them for a moment, not out of bitterness, but because I wanted to remember how easy it had become for them to forget me. I stepped back from the balcony before they could look up. Let them board. Let them feel the freedom they thought they'd earned. They had no idea, and that was the best part. There's a kind of power in knowing something no one else does. As I walked the upper deck that afternoon, the breeze lifting strands of my hair, I felt it settle into my bones. Not the kind of power that shouts, but the kind that watches, waits, and smiles. I wasn't hunting for them. I truly wasn't. But the ship wasn't that big when it came to coincidence. It was only a matter of time before we crossed paths. It happened on day 2, just after breakfast. I had just returned from a spa appointment, a facial and a warm stone neck massage that left me walking taller than I had in years. My concierge, a kind young man named Luis, insisted I stop by the private solarium deck. It was quiet, exclusive, reserved for owner's guests. He brought me a small glass of elderflower lemonade, chilled just right. I walked through the glass doors, soft, music in the background, the sea stretching endlessly beyond the rails. There were only 3 other guests lounging in plush white chairs, 2 older gentlemen reading books, and a younger woman scrolling on her phone. I was halfway across the deck when I heard the sliding doors open behind me, heels, and laughter. The kind of laughter I'd heard 1,000 times, tight, practiced, and performative. Kelsey. She stepped into the solarium like it belonged to her. She wore a champagne-colored one-piece swimsuit, oversized sunglasses, and a silk cover-up that fluttered as she walked. She was mid-sentence, something about how their cabin wasn't exactly the photos, but she trailed off the moment she looked up and saw me. Her whole body froze. I turned slowly, deliberately, met her eyes. She blinked, stumbled a step, and pulled off her sunglasses like she needed to confirm I was real. I sipped my lemonade and nodded politely. "Kelsey," she stared. Marjorie? What are you, how did you—" I gave her a soft smile. "Lovely day, isn't it?" She looked like someone had shoved her into the ocean. I didn't know you were on the ship," she stammered. "Eric didn't mention—" "I'm sure he didn't," I said gently. "This was a last-minute decision." Her eyes darted around the solarium. "This area it's restricted. How did you—" I raised an eyebrow, then gestured toward the large doorframe behind me. This is the owner's deck. I'm staying in Suite 1701. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I leaned in just slightly. It's just a short walk from here, actually. Very quiet, lovely views. I could see the exact moment she processed it. The suite number, the implication, the realization that I hadn't just stumbled aboard. I had done this deliberately and with quiet precision. Kelsey opened her mouth again, then closed it. "Does Eric know?" she finally asked. I tilted my head. "About what?" "That you're here." "I imagine he will soon." She nodded too quickly, fidgeting with her cover-up. "Right. Well, I should go let him know you're here. He'll be surprised." "I'm sure he will," I said. And with that, she turned on her heel and fled. I didn't follow. I walked to the lounge chair near the edge, sat down, and closed my eyes. The sun warmed my face. The wind kissed my skin. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not because I shouted, but because I didn't. 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps again. Louder this time. Faster. I opened one eye. Eric. Hair tousled, mouth slightly open, his polo shirt wrinkled. He looked like a man who'd just been told a ghost was walking the ship. "Mom?" he said, like it was a question. I sat up straighter. "Hello, Eric." His eyes darted from my face to the chair, to the staff nearby and back again. You're on this cruise?" "Yes." He blinked. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him calmly. "Why would I?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. "I didn't think you'd—" He shook his head. I just thought you wouldn't want to, that it might be too much." I sipped my drink. "It's not." Kelsey appeared behind him, arms folded tightly. Her lips were pressed into a thin, worried line. I just thought you'd be home," Eric added, his voice softening. "You didn't say anything." "Neither did you," I said. "But I'm glad we're all here. It's a beautiful ship." Eric stared at me like he was trying to understand who I'd become, but I hadn't become anyone new. I had simply stopped asking for permission to exist. After an awkward silence, Kelsey spoke. "Well, we'll see you around, I guess." I smiled. "You might." They walked off, whispering furiously. I stayed in my seat, watching the waves break against the side of the ship. Let them feel unsettled. Let them wonder what else I'd planned, because I hadn't said a word about the gala yet, and they had no idea whose name was already printed on the captain's private guest list. That evening, the ship glittered like a floating chandelier. The Azure Princess spared no expense on its formal dining nights. Crystal chandeliers, velvet booths, a grand piano in the corner, white linen tablecloths, candles at every setting, waitstaff in pressed uniforms moving like choreography. It felt like a dream dipped in gold. I stood in front of the mirror in my suite, applying a final touch of lipstick. Navy blue, same gown I wore to Richard's retirement party 15 years ago. It still fit, not because I hadn't changed, but because I had held on to the parts of myself I refused to give up. Dignity, presence, grace. My silver hair was pinned back in soft waves. Around my neck hung the pearl necklace Richard gave me on our 20th anniversary. It glimmered in the light as I picked up my evening bag and stepped into the corridor. Luis, my concierge, was waiting with a small nod. "Mrs. Bennett, your table at the captain's hall is prepared. May I escort you?" I smiled. "Lead the way." We moved through the ship's private elevator down to the formal dining level. Staff parted as we passed, offering warm smiles, a few even whispering my name as we walked by. As we approached the entrance, I saw Eric and Kelsey standing at the maitre d's podium, looking mildly agitated. "She said we requested a window seat," Kelsey was saying, her tone tight. "Not by the kitchen." The maitre d' nodded sympathetically. "I'm afraid our premier tables are reserved for legacy guests or those specifically invited to the captain's hall." "That's us," Kelsey insisted. But then Luis cleared his throat, and the maitre d's face brightened. "Ah, Mrs. Bennett, right this way." Eric turned around. He did a double take. Kelsey's eyes widened. "Your seat is with Captain Montoya at the head table," the maitre d' said to me. "Would you like me to take your wrap?" I removed my shawl with a polite smile. "Thank you. That would be lovely." As I was led past them, I paused for just a moment, not long enough to be dramatic, just long enough for it to register. "I believe they're dining on the west side of the hall," I said softly to the maitre d'. "Be sure they get a good view of the musicians. It's such a lovely quartet." Kelsey's jaw tensed. Eric looked like he was going to say something but stopped himself. I continued on to the captain's hall. A long mahogany table sat under soft golden light. There were only 10 seats, each filled by someone carefully selected, an ambassador's wife, a novelist from France, an opera singer from Milan, and me. Captain Montoya stood when I approached, a tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a voice like silk. "Ah, Mrs. Bennet," he said, pulling out my chair. "We've been looking forward to meeting you. Richard spoke so highly of you in his final correspondence." My breath caught for a moment, but I smiled. "Thank you, Captain. He would have loved this." Throughout dinner, I laughed, shared stories, answered questions about my career and education, and even gave a brief toast when prompted. "To second chances," I said, raising my glass, "and to not asking permission to live." Polite applause followed. The captain touched his glass to mine. Meanwhile, in the distance, I spotted Eric and Kelsey at their table, well within sight, though clearly not within the same social orbit. Kelsey was frowning at her wine glass. Eric stared down at his plate. Every now and then, they glanced over. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I simply existed, in full bloom, right in front of the people who thought I had nothing left to offer the world. After dessert, as I walked out of the hall, Kelsey intercepted me near the lobby fountain. "I just want to know," she said, voice brittle, "why you're doing this." "Doing what?" "All this. The suite, the dinners, the show." I tilted my head. "Kelsey, I'm just enjoying my vacation." She lowered her voice. "You're trying to make us look bad." "No," I said, folding my hands neatly in front of me. "You did that all on your own." She stared at me. I added, "You assumed I wouldn't show up, that I wouldn't fit in, that I wouldn't be welcome." "Because we were trying to protect you," she blurted. "We thought it would be exhausting for you." "Funny," I replied. "I don't feel tired at all." At that, she turned and stormed off, heels clicking against the tile like punctuation marks in a tantrum. I walked back to my suite alone, but it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like arrival. Not just to a destination, but to a truth I'd long forgotten. I was never the one who needed to catch up. They were the ones who had fallen behind. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. By the third day, word had spread among the upper deck guests that the woman in the owner's suite was somehow connected to the young couple, 2 floors below, who had booked a standard balcony room. It wasn't gossip. It was curiosity. Questions passed quietly across cocktail hours and shuffleboard games. Didn't she say her son was on board? They don't seem to eat together, do they? Funny how she's always invited and they're always standing off to the side. I wasn't trying to stir anything, but when people pretend you're invisible for long enough, your presence becomes its own statement. I kept to myself mostly, lounged in the sun during the day, attended lectures and cooking classes, took long walks on the quieter decks where the wind spoke louder than people. But Kelsey, she couldn't handle it. She was unraveling. It started subtly. I noticed her makeup looked heavier, like she was overcompensating. Her smile had that tight, artificial quality women wear when they're just barely holding themselves together. Then came the first outburst, at the concierge desk of all places. I had walked by quietly on my way to a watercolor class when I heard her voice rise. "You gave her early spa access?" she said sharply, gesturing toward me as I approached. The poor young woman behind the desk looked flustered. "Mrs. Bennet is a legacy guest, ma'am, owner tier. She has access to—" I don't care what access she has, Kelsey snapped. We've been trying to book those spots for days and we keep getting bumped. I paused, glanced at the concierge, then said gently, There are plenty of other treatments available, Kelsey. Perhaps something relaxing might suit you. She turned to me, eyes blazing. You think this is funny, don't you? No, I said, keeping my tone calm. I think it's unfortunate that you're wasting your vacation being upset about someone else's. She sputtered something under her breath and stormed off. Again. It was becoming her signature move. Eric caught up with me later, sheepish. Mom, can we talk? We were in the atrium where a string quartet played softly beneath a chandelier that reminded me of Paris. I nodded and let him walk beside me to a quiet bench. He looked tired, older than his years. Maybe it was the sunburn, or maybe it was the guilt. She's just a little wound up, he began. She seems uncomfortable, I said. She didn't expect you to be here, neither did I. I gathered. He shifted in his seat. It's just, you being here in that suite at the captain's table, it's all a bit surprising. Why? He looked at me. Because we didn't think you'd, I don't know, want this. Want what, Eric? I asked, tilting my head. Luxury? Privacy? Company? Or just to feel human again? He didn't answer, so I continued. You assumed I was past joy, past the point of indulgence. You thought I'd be grateful just to be thought of occasionally. Am I right? Eric rubbed his face. We weren't trying to hurt you. Intent doesn't erase impact, I said quietly. There was a silence between us then, long and heavy. I'm sorry, he muttered finally. Then tell her to stop. He looked up. Tell her to stop acting like my presence is a personal insult, like I'm intruding on a world I helped build. Later that evening, things reached a boiling point. It was during the live jazz performance in the main lounge. I had just taken my seat at a reserved table near the front, invited by one of the guest performers I'd met earlier that day, a lovely woman named Angela who reminded me of my younger sister, sharp eyes, soft voice, and a wit that didn't need volume to cut. The music began, smooth, rich, like melted gold. I closed my eyes, swaying gently, feeling every note soak into my skin. Then, Kelsey, Eric hissed in a stage whisper from behind me. Not here. But she was already charging forward. She reached my table, arms crossed tightly, her voice sharp and loud enough for several nearby guests to pause their conversations. You've made your point, Marjorie. I looked up slowly. I'm sorry? She gestured around, eyes flashing. This display. It's all just petty. You could have taken a normal cabin, traveled another week, but you picked this one, this cruise. You booked the best suite and paraded around like some matriarch queen. I smiled faintly. I didn't parade, I simply walked. Don't be clever, she snapped. You came here to humiliate us. Angela stood up then, placing a firm hand on Kelsey's shoulder. Ma'am, this is a guest area. You're disrupting the performance. Kelsey flushed scarlet. I rose gently from my seat, brushed a wrinkle from my dress, and said in a calm, measured voice that carried across the quieting lounge, No, Kelsey. You feel humiliated because you can't imagine a woman my age doing something without your permission. A hush fell over the room. I walked out quietly, the music resuming behind me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to shrink to keep the peace. I let her tantrum echo in the silence. After the incident in the lounge, I expected whispers, maybe even stares. I assumed people might see me as a meddlesome old woman who had stirred up drama on a luxury cruise. But the next morning, something strange happened. As I stepped onto the early deck yoga class, more of a stretching circle for those of us with knees that don't bend like they used to, a woman tapped my shoulder. You were magnificent last night, she said, offering a kind smile. Honestly, I've never seen someone handle cruelty with such poise. I blinked. Oh, that wasn't... But she waved me off. You don't have to explain. Some people spend so much energy pretending to be refined. You reminded us what real grace looks like. Her name was Linda, 71, widowed, used to teach high school math. We fell into easy conversation as we folded ourselves slowly into the day's first stretch. Later that afternoon, in the solarium, a gentleman from Colorado, Frank, retired police sergeant, handed me a lemonade and said, "We've been rooting for you. That daughter-in-law of yours? She's got a snake's tongue and a baby's sense of consequence." I chuckled. "She's just young and afraid of looking small." "Then maybe she shouldn't try to step over mountains," he said, lifting his glass. "It turns out people notice more than you think, especially on a ship where the sea forces you to look inward just as much as outward." And what they'd noticed wasn't just the family drama. They noticed how I carried myself, quiet, polite, present. Not once had I raised my voice. Not once had I taken the bait. But what touched me most was something that happened 2 nights later. There was a poetry reading in the forward lounge, a small event, dimly lit, mostly retirees and the occasional romantic couple who wandered in, curious. I'd brought my tea and sat alone, just enjoying the hush of the crowd. The ship's entertainment director, a young woman named Naomi, stood at the front and said, "Before we begin tonight's scheduled readings, we have a request. A guest aboard this ship asked if she could share a poem her late husband once wrote to her. We thought that was a beautiful idea." My breath caught. They motioned to me. I hadn't requested it. Someone else had. Angela, the jazz singer, smiled from the back of the room and gave me a little nod. I stood slowly, walked to the small podium, and unfolded the yellowed slip of paper I'd carried in my handbag since Richard passed. It wasn't long. Just a few lines he scribbled on a napkin once during a road trip. Her laugh was my compass, her silence my sky. She carried the world and never asked why. The room was still when I finished, and then gentle, genuine applause. People came up afterward, not out of politeness, but out of connection. Some shared stories of their spouses. Some simply held my hand for a moment. There was no pretense, no pity. They didn't see me as someone past her prime. They saw me. Eric and Kelsey, on the other hand, were nowhere in sight. I found out later from the concierge that they had tried, unsuccessfully, to request upgrades to a higher deck. After Kelsey's lounge outburst, they were politely but firmly declined further accommodation changes. The staff, it seemed, had drawn their own conclusions about decorum, and mine. The head stewardess, Marta, began checking in on me personally. She brought me tea in the morning, asked if I needed a fresh book from the ship's library, even invited me to a behind-the-scenes crew luncheon where guests weren't typically allowed. "You remind me of my mother," she said, brushing her curly bangs from her eyes. "Strong, steady, kind. She passed last year." I placed my hand over hers. "Then I'm honored." It wasn't about popularity. I wasn't collecting attention, but I was collecting something else, recognition. Not for what I'd done, but for who I still was. At dinner one evening, I saw Eric sitting alone at the far end of the restaurant. Kelsey wasn't with him. His shoulders were slouched, his plate barely touched. Our eyes met across the room. He didn't wave, but he didn't look away either. He just sat there, blinking, as if seeing me for the first time in decades. And I, surrounded by people who had welcomed me without history, without expectation, I lifted my glass quietly in his direction. I didn't need applause. I had peace. The evening of the mid-cruise gala arrived like a soft crescendo, elegant and slow, but undeniably powerful. It was the ship's most formal night, the one that called for gowns and gloves, black tuxedos and polished shoes. The ballroom glimmered with gold lights strung along the ceiling like constellations. Tables dressed in ivory linen, centerpieces of roses and calla lilies floated in crystal bowls. Live violins filled the air like silk. I had been to galas before, fundraisers, weddings, banquets, always on the edges, smiling politely, clapping at the right moments. But this one felt different. Not because it was grander, but because I wasn't just an attendee, I was invited. 3 days earlier, a handwritten note had arrived at my suite, sealed in blue wax. Mrs. Bennet, it would be my honor to have you join me as a guest of distinction at the captain's table during our gala night. Your presence aboard has not gone unnoticed, and I would be privileged to raise a glass in your company. Captain R. Montoya. I sat with that letter in my lap for 20 minutes before I could breathe properly. That night, I wore the gown I had been saving for someday. A deep plum silk dress with long sleeves, a soft V-neck, and a subtle shimmer that caught the light without begging for it. I wore my best earrings, amethysts that used to belong to Richard's mother, and a gold clutch I hadn't touched since his retirement party. Louise escorted me down the central staircase of the ballroom as the string quartet swelled. Guests turned. Some smiled, some simply looked in quiet appreciation. No one rushed me. No one hurried me along. I was treated as if I belonged, because I did. Captain Montoya stood to greet me at the long, elevated table at the front of the room. He kissed my hand like a gentleman from another time. "Mrs. Bennet," he said warmly, "you look absolutely radiant." "You're very kind," I replied, taking my seat beside him. To my right sat Angela, the jazz singer, glowing in emerald satin. To my left, a retired judge from New York who leaned over and said, "My wife would have loved your poem. She used to write them on napkins, too." The evening passed like a dream. Dishes of seafood risotto, champagne flutes that refilled themselves, laughter in every corner, conversations full of life, not gossip or small talk, but real talk, about books, travel, loss, and everything in between. And then came the toast. Captain Montoya stood. The room quieted instantly. "I'd like to raise a glass," he began, lifting his flute, "to the quiet travelers, the ones who board with little fanfare but leave the greatest impact." His eyes swept the room and then landed directly on me. Tonight, I toast a guest whose presence has reminded us all that elegance has no age, that grace once earned never fades, and that sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that don't need to shout. My breath hitched. "To Mrs. Marjorie Bennet," he said. The room stood, a sea of raised glasses. "To Marjorie," they echoed. I stood slowly, blinking back emotion. I had not expected this. Not applause, not admiration, not a room full of strangers to see me more clearly than my own son had in years. Captain Montoya leaned toward me. "I hope you don't mind the spotlight." I laughed softly. I spent most of my life dimming mine. It feels good to let it shine. I glanced toward the back of the room, where I knew Eric and Kelsey had been seated, politely distanced, I imagined, by the ship's very diplomatic event manager. And there they were. Kelsey was frozen, mid-sip of her wine. Eric, my son, stood like everyone else, but his glass trembled in his hand. He didn't smile, but he didn't sit. He watched, as if trying to reconcile the woman he saw now with the version of me he'd filed away somewhere between retired and replaced. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply nodded once. And in that moment, I felt something release in me. Not spite or anger, but the burden of being overlooked. I wasn't an accessory. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a relic of the past. I was a woman, whole, still breathing, still becoming. And as the room sat down and the music resumed, I remained standing just a little longer, letting it all soak in. Later that night, as I walked back to my suite, my heels clicking gently on the carpet, I passed a young couple who'd seen the toast. The woman smiled. "You're the one from the captain's table, right?" I nodded. "You reminded me of my grandmother," she said. "She passed last year, but she always said growing older was like growing into yourself." "Your grandmother was wise," I said softly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to return home, because for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. The morning after the gala, the ship pulled into a small private island port. One of those sparkling hidden getaways the brochures love to flaunt. Turquoise waters, pristine white, sand, hammocks slung between palm trees, the kind of place that feels unreal until your feet hit the shore. I decided to skip the formal excursion. Instead, I wandered the beach slowly with a wide-brimmed straw hat shading my face, sandals in hand, the cool water lapping at my ankles. My mind kept drifting to last night. The captain's words, the toast, the applause. It wasn't pride I felt, it was clarity. I had spent so long questioning my worth, so long wondering if I was the one who had failed to adapt, failed to fit into the lives of a son and daughter-in-law who treated me like background noise. But last night had confirmed something deep and long denied. I hadn't changed. They had just stopped looking. As I rounded a bend in the beach, I noticed a familiar silhouette seated on a low bench under a tree, her posture stiff and face turned away from the ocean. Kelsey, alone. Her heels were half buried in the sand. One hand held a sun hat limply, the other shaded her eyes as she watched the waves. I thought about walking past, thought about keeping my peace, but then she noticed me, and surprisingly, she didn't look angry. She looked exhausted. I approached slowly, stopping a respectful few feet away. "I won't stay if you'd rather not talk," I said gently. She looked up, startled. "No, actually, Can I say something?" I nodded. She gestured to the bench. I sat. For a long moment, we just watched the ocean. Then finally, she spoke. "You weren't supposed to see any of this." I said nothing. "I mean, we didn't invite you because—" She hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "Eric said it would just stress you out, that you'd be tired all the time, that you'd need help getting around." I turned to look at her. "That's what he told you?" She hesitated. "That's what we told ourselves." I waited. "But the truth?" Her voice dropped. "The truth is—" I didn't want to feel compared. I didn't want you around reminding people that I'm not the matriarch. That surprised me. She didn't say it like an insult. She said it like a confession. "My parents were never warm," she continued. "They weren't like you. They didn't host dinners or sew Halloween costumes or take interest in my life beyond performance. And when I married Eric, I felt like I had to compete with this version of you he always talked about." She glanced at me sideways. "You made me feel inadequate." "Kelsey," I said quietly, "I never meant to." "I know," she replied, "and that's the part that stung. You didn't even try, and you were still better at the things I wanted to be." I watched her pull a strand of hair behind her ear, her bravado visibly cracked. "He always talks about how strong you are," she said. "How you held everything together after his dad passed. How you didn't take help unless you absolutely needed it. I didn't grow up with women like that. I grew up with women who took pills and checked out." There was silence between us, except for the gentle crash of waves. "I resented you for how easy it seemed," she whispered. I took a long breath. It wasn't easy. It never was. But I never had the option of falling apart. She looked down. "And then," she added bitterly, "you show up here, in that suite, with the captain's invitation, with half the ship wanting to drink champagne with you, and I just snapped." Her voice trembled. "I thought I had won. I thought I finally had something that was ours, me and Eric. No competition, just space. And then you showed up." I studied her face. It wasn't cruel now. It was lost. "I didn't come to compete, Kelsey," I said. "I came because I'm tired of being erased." Tears pooled in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, the way someone does when they're not used to being seen while vulnerable. After a pause, she asked, "Why didn't you say anything? Before the trip? After the hurtful things?" I smiled faintly, because sometimes words don't land, but presence does. She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "truly." "I believe you," I said. And I did. I didn't expect a hug or a transformation. I didn't expect her to run back to Eric and tell him everything she'd said, but I also didn't need that. I had already won, not through revenge, but through the quiet, undeniable fact that I had outgrown their limitations of me. I stood and dusted the sand from my dress. Kelsey stayed seated, staring at the sea, and as I walked away, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The next morning, the ship's Wi-Fi came back online. We'd been without it for 2 days, something about satellite interference near the islands. Most people rushed to their phones the moment the signal returned, eager to post updates, check bank accounts, or show off sunsets and cocktails to their followers back home. I hadn't been in a rush, but when I finally turned on my phone and the notifications began trickling in, I felt something shift again, not inside me this time, but outside. A vibration in the atmosphere. 32 missed messages. All from the family group chat. For years, I'd stayed in that chat silently. It had become a sort of bulletin board curated by Eric and my other 2 children. Announcements about promotions, baby photos, house renovations. Look at our new backsplash. Bryce lost his first tooth. Dinner at Kelsey's. No space this time, but we'll send photos. I rarely replied, partly because I was often left out of the actual events, but mostly because when I did chime in, I got emoji reactions, not real responses, not follow-up questions, just the thumbs up and hearts they gave out like digital napkins. But now suddenly the room was on fire. It started with a screenshot. Someone, likely one of the ship's guests, had uploaded a picture of me from gala night to the cruise's public photo album. There I was, laughing with Captain Montoya at the head table, glass raised mid-toast, elegant, alive. The image had been reshared over a dozen times in the cruise's private social media group. It had apparently made it back to someone in the family circle. My granddaughter, Alyssa, Eric's niece, was the one who dropped it in the chat. Alyssa, 19. Can someone explain why Grandma's on a yacht in a ball gown looking like a movie star? Then came Jamie, my daughter. Wait, Mom's on a cruise. I thought she was home. Eric? Tony, my youngest. She told me she was gardening this week. That is definitely not gardening. Alyssa again. She's with the captain. Y'all, she's at the captain's table. This is so iconic. And then, finally, Eric replied. Eric. Yeah, she surprised us. There was a long pause in the chat. Then Jamie again. Surprised you? You mean you didn't invite her? Tony. Seriously? You guys went on a 10-day cruise and didn't think to ask Mom? Eric didn't reply. Kelsey tried. Kelsey. It was meant to be a couples-only thing. We didn't think she'd want to travel. The silence after that said everything. And then, unexpectedly, Alyssa chimed in again. I talked to some people on that ship. One girl's aunt is there. They said Grandma's the most respected guest on board. Like people are asking her for advice. She's low-key a queen. My chest tightened, not with anxiety, but something warmer, fiercer. Like my worth had finally cracked through the digital wall that had shut me out for years. Jamie followed up. Mom, if you're reading this, you look beautiful. I'm so sorry we didn't know. Tony added, I'm proud of you. Wish I could have seen your face when Eric and Kelsey spotted you on that ship. I chuckled softly, and finally I typed something. My first real message to the group in almost 6 months. Me. I'll be home next week. I'll bring souvenirs and stories, but no plants. Eric said I'd be too tired to carry anything. The typing bubbles popped up instantly. Alyssa. She's funny now, too. What is happening? Jamie. Eric, you really fumbled this one. Tony. Mom, you're my new hero. For a woman who had spent the last few years shrinking in her family's perception, that moment felt like an exhale I didn't realize I'd been holding for decades. I had become someone they had to see again, not because I raised my voice, but because I stood in my truth. Sometimes, presence is louder than protest, and I had never been more present. That evening, while walking back to my suite, I passed Eric in the corridor. He was alone, He looked tired. When our eyes met, he gave a quiet nod, a silent acknowledgement. The first honest one in a long time. I didn't say anything, but I smiled and kept walking. Because for the first time in years, they weren't checking on me out of obligation. They were watching me with awe. The final night aboard the Azure Princess arrived like a quiet curtain fall. No fanfare, just the steady hum of suitcases being packed, farewell dinner menus being handed out, and passengers exchanging email addresses they'd never actually use. I had spent most of the day alone, not because I was lonely, but because I wanted to savor it. I wandered the promenade deck slowly, watching the sky fade into gold, letting the wind pull at my shawl. I paused to sit beneath one of the massive sails and simply listened. The ocean has a way of reminding you how small your worries are. That night, I skipped the main dining hall. Instead, I ordered dinner to the suite, one final meal overlooking the sea, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a single glass of white wine. As I ate, I watched the horizon disappear into night, stars beginning to flicker one by one like slow applause. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. I didn't write it to be dramatic or to shame anyone. I wrote it the way I used to journal, plain and clear, for myself as much as for them. It wasn't long, just enough to be remembered without being resented. I slipped it into an envelope and wrote their cabin number across the front in clean block letters, 5417. Before midnight, I walked the length of the ship, past the late-night lounge where couples danced slow under string lights, past the gift shop already closed, and finally to their hallway, Suite 5417. I stood there a moment. The hallway was empty, quiet. I could hear only the distant shuffle of room service carts and the faint rhythm of footsteps above. Then I slid the envelope under the door and walked away, back to my suite, back to sleep, back to peace. I don't know exactly when they found it. I don't know what they felt when they read it, but I do know what I wrote. And for the first time, I'd like to share it. Dear Eric and Kelsey, I want you to know I'm not angry. Disappointed? Yes. Hurt? Of course. But anger? No. Anger fades too fast to hold a shape. I came on this cruise not to confront you, but to find myself again. I've spent too many years living in the quiet corners of other people's lives, smiling from the edge, waiting for a place at the table. You made me feel small without ever saying the words. And perhaps you didn't mean to. Perhaps it was convenience, or ignorance, or fear. But I'm not small. I've been through wars, inside and outside of myself, and I am still standing. What you saw on this cruise wasn't revenge, it was resurrection. I don't need an apology. I don't even need an invitation. I just needed to remember that I never required your permission to live fully. When you told me to stay home because I was too old, you didn't realize the gift you gave me, a reason to prove that I wasn't done yet. So thank you for underestimating me. It reminded me who I was, Mom. I never asked them about the letter. They never brought it up. But the next morning, something changed. As I waited in the VIP disembarkation lounge, a soft knock came at the glass door. Eric. He wasn't wearing his usual cocky grin. He wasn't posturing. He just looked still. He stepped inside slowly, holding a single envelope of his own. He didn't hand it to me, just placed it on the coffee table and said, "You don't have to read it now, or ever, but it's real." I nodded once. We stood in silence, and then Kelsey appeared behind him. No makeup, no tension, just human. "I hope you liked the cruise," she said softly. "I did," I replied. "Very much." They didn't ask to ride down with me. They didn't ask to talk more. And that was fine. Some gaps don't close in a week, but the door no longer felt locked. I watched them walk away together, not in shame, not in anger, just quietly. Like maybe they'd heard me. I waited a few minutes before picking up the envelope Eric had left. I tucked it into my handbag. I haven't opened it yet. Maybe I will someday. Or maybe it's enough to know he wrote it. Sometimes the gesture is the beginning. Sometimes the silence after the storm is all the answer you need. As the ship docked and the engines quieted, I felt no sadness, no aching goodbye, just a deep, full knowing. I had come here invisible, and I was leaving. Seen. The ship docked just after sunrise. The soft churn of the engines slowed to a whisper as the Azure Princess nudged gently against the pier. From the window of my suite, I could see the port beginning to stir. Workers in neon vests, carts lined up for luggage, passengers already gathering at the gangway, eager to rejoin their lives. I stayed still for a moment. The room was quiet now, stripped of the music and clinking glasses of the nights before. The fresh fruit bowl on the table had only 2 apples left. My formal gown hung carefully in the closet, pressed and untouched since the gala. My bag sat zipped near the door, heavier somehow, though I had packed no more than I'd brought. Heavier with what I'd reclaimed. I opened the balcony doors one last time and stepped out barefoot. The air was cool, not quite morning, not quite daylight, just in between. I stood there, breathing it in, and I thought. I didn't just travel to the Caribbean, I traveled back to myself. Disembarkation for Legacy guests was simple. No lines, no chaos. A private hallway with velvet ropes and polished brass rails. Luis arrived promptly at 8 to escort me out. "You made quite an impression this week, Mrs. Bennet," he said kindly, wheeling my small suitcase beside me. "I didn't mean to," I replied, "but I'm not sorry for it." He smiled. "Neither are we." As we moved through the private corridor, I passed a few of the guests I'd met during the week. Frank gave me a thumbs up. Angela mouthed, "Stay in touch." Linda blew a kiss. At the base of the gangway, I paused. Eric and Kelsey stood a few yards ahead, waiting for their luggage. They didn't see me at first, but then Kelsey turned. She didn't flinch. She offered a small nod. And then Eric turned too. He didn't wave, but he didn't look away either. His eyes held mine for a beat longer than expected. I gave them both a quiet, respectful nod, then turned to walk down the gangway and into the sun. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel smug. I just felt whole. Outside the port, a car waited for me, arranged by the cruise concierge, of course. A black sedan with tinted windows and a quiet driver named Celia, who offered me a water bottle and a warm cloth for my hands. As we pulled onto the highway, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope Eric had left. I ran my finger across the crease, but I still didn't open it. Not yet. Some things take time, and I was in no rush. Instead, I pulled out a small leather notebook I had started during the cruise, half filled with notes, sketches, and ideas. At the top of the next blank page, I wrote, "Next trip, Paris, stay in Montmartre, eat too many croissants, send no apologies." Because this wasn't the end. This was a beginning. For too long, I had waited for permission to matter again. Waited for the phone to ring. Waited for my children to remember the weight of my sacrifices. Waited for invitations that never came, for thank yous that arrived too late or not at all. But I was done waiting. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had remembered something bigger than their approval. My life is mine. A week later, back at home, I unpacked slowly, folded things with care, hung the dress I wore to the gala in the back of my closet, not to hide it, but to save it for another night, another spark, another version of me still waiting. I placed a framed photo from the cruise, a candid one snapped by the concierge, on my mantel. It was me on the balcony of the owner's suite, arms stretched slightly out, hair caught in the wind, eyes closed, a smile that looked nothing like the one I used to wear. It looked like freedom. Later that evening, my daughter Jamie called. So did Tony, even Alyssa. For the first time in months, maybe years, their questions weren't about what I could do for them. They asked what I was doing next, and I told them. without hesitation. I think I'll go to Paris in the fall, maybe stay a while, maybe take up painting again. There was a pause. Then Jamie said, "You should, Mom. You deserve it." That night, I slept with the balcony door cracked open, the wind breathing through the lace curtains. I didn't feel old. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt beginning, and beginning is a beautiful place to be.